He kissed her right there at the table. Not a peck, not something you could explain away. Adebayo pulled the other woman close, one hand sliding along her jaw, and kissed her the way a man kisses someone he's been waiting all evening to touch. Slow, deliberate, like the rest of the restaurant didn't exist. And Imani Okafor was sitting 40 feet away. She had no idea. She was laughing at something her cousin had said, pressing a napkin to her mouth because she'd nearly choked on her water, the way she always did when something caught her off guard. Her engagement ring caught the candlelight. She was happy, genuinely, completely happy. The kind of happy that's almost painful to watch when you know what's about to destroy it. Kang Tae-jun saw all of it. He stood near the far wall, half hidden behind a column, and he watched the man his secretary was going to marry press his mouth against another woman's throat and whisper something that made her laugh. 8 years. Tae-jun had known Imani Okafor for 8 years, and he had never once seen her look the way she looked tonight, unguarded, warm, completely herself. And the man sitting across from her was going to take that and grind it into dust. If you've ever watched someone walk towards something that will break them, and you were too far away to stop it, you already know exactly how this story begins. Before this night is over, one engagement will be destroyed, one man will hit the floor, and Kang Tae-jun, one of the most feared figures in South Korea's underground, will discover that the only thing he was never prepared to lose was the woman he spent 8 years pretending not to notice. Stay with us. Subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a like and tell us in the comments, what city or country are you watching from tonight? I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to the beginning. The rain came in sideways that afternoon, hitting the floor-to-ceiling windows of Kang Tae-jun's 43rd floor office, the way it always did in late autumn. Not gently, not cinematically, just cold and relentless and indifferent to everything below it. Tae-jun didn't look up from the contract on his desk. He hadn't looked up in 40 minutes. The room was the kind of quiet that only exists when everyone inside it has learned, through hard experience, not to interrupt the man at the center of it. Then the door opened. That wasn't unusual. Imani opened that door a dozen times a day, with reports, with coffee, with the kind of quiet efficiency that had become so familiar, he'd stopped registering it the way you stop registering the sound of your own heartbeat. He heard her footsteps. He heard the soft sound of something being said on the corner of his desk. He didn't look up. I'll sign the Daejeon Amendment after the call with Hong Kong, he said. Push the 3 o'clock to 4:30. Silence. He looked up. Imani was standing on the other side of the desk. She wasn't holding a tablet or a coffee cup or a stack of folders. She was just standing there, hands clasped in front of her, wearing that expression he'd only seen twice in 8 years. The one that meant she had something to say and had already decided she was going to say it no matter what. On the desk in front of him were 2 envelopes, plain white, both sealed, both placed with the kind of careful precision that told him she'd thought about exactly where to put them. "What's this?" he said. It wasn't really a question. "The one on the left is my formal resignation." Her voice was steady, practiced, maybe. "The one on the right is a wedding invitation. I'm getting married in 6 weeks. After the ceremony, I'll be relocating to Lagos permanently." Tae-jun didn't move. He looked at the envelopes. He looked at her face. He looked back at the envelopes. "To who?" "Tunde Adebayo. We've been seeing each other for 14 months. A small pause. "I know the timing isn't ideal. I've already prepared a full transition document, candidate profiles, handover notes for every active account, a 2-week training schedule for whoever you bring in. Everything is documented." Of course it was. Everything Imani Okafor touched was documented. That was the thing about her. She didn't just do her job, she built systems around it, quiet architecture that held everything upright without anyone noticing it was there. He still hadn't touched the envelopes. 6 weeks, he said. "Yes." "Who approved your schedule through Q1? Something flickered across her face. Not quite hurt. More like she'd prepared for this too. "I'll work through the end of the month. The transition can be completed in 3 weeks if we start immediately." Tae-jun leaned back in his chair. He looked at her the way he looked at contracts he hadn't finished reading yet. Not dismissively, not warmly, just with the particular stillness of someone gathering information before making a decision. He had looked at Imani Okafor like that for 8 years. He had no idea that was what he'd been doing. "Fine," he said. Send in whoever's handling the Hong Kong call prep. She nodded, turned, and walked out the door, leaving both envelopes exactly where she'd placed them. Tae-jun sat there for a long moment after she left. Then he picked up the one on the left. He didn't open it. His name carried weight in rooms where names like his were never spoken above a murmur. Kang Tae-jun, 41 years old, publicly the chairman and chief executive of KT Global Holdings, a legitimate corporation with offices in 12 countries and a quarterly revenue that made financial journalists write superlatives. Privately, he controlled a network that moved money, resolved disputes, and occasionally made problems disappear in ways that never appeared in any filing. He had started with nothing, which was the version of the story everyone who worked for him knew, the longer version, the one that explained the scar along his left forearm and the particular way he went still when someone raised their voice near him, was not a story he told. He had built everything he had through precision and control. He did not make impulsive decisions. He did not allow personal complications to enter his professional life. He had over the years cultivated a reputation for coldness that was not entirely unearned. Imani Okafor had walked into his offices 8 years ago with a resume that should not have impressed him and had proceeded within her first 72 hours to reorganize his entire scheduling system, identify 3 redundant expenditures in his legitimate operations, and tell him, without flinching, that his previous assistant had been double billing client entertainment expenses. He had hired her on the spot. He told himself it was purely rational. She was extraordinarily competent. She was discreet. She was reliable in the way that very few people in his orbit ever managed to be. And she had the particular quality, rarer than talent, of not needing acknowledgement to keep doing excellent work. What he had not accounted for, and would not have admitted if asked, was that Imani Okafor was also the only person in his building who treated him like a person rather than a phenomenon. Not familiarly, not without professionalism. But when she disagreed with something, she said so. When he was wrong about a scheduling conflict, she told him he was wrong. When he worked past 2 in the morning, 3 nights running, she left a container of food on his desk with a sticky note that said simply, "You haven't eaten since noon. No deference, no performance of submission. Just a quiet, plain-spoken accountability that no one else in his life offered him." He had never thought about why that mattered. He was thinking about it now. The resignation letter was exactly what he'd expected. Formal, thorough, professionally worded. 2 weeks' notice. Offer to extend if needed. Gratitude for the opportunity. Everything filed and signed. He read it twice. Set it down. He did not open the wedding invitation. His head of operations, a compact, serious man named Director Seo, came to find him at 7 that evening. By then, most of the floor was empty. Rain was still hammering the windows. Tae-jun was sitting at his desk doing nothing, which Director Seo had never witnessed in 11 years of working with him. "She turned in her notice," Seo said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "I saw." Seo paused in the doorway. He was not a man who editorialized. "The transition document she left is comprehensive." "I know." "Do you want me to begin the replacement search?" Tae-jun looked at him. "Not yet." Seo nodded slowly. "Should I know why?" "No." That was the end of the conversation. Seo left. Tae-jun sat there until the city outside his windows had gone fully dark, and he still hadn't moved the 2 envelopes off his desk. He told himself he was following her because of the security concern. That was not the reason. He knew it wasn't the reason approximately 40 minutes after he had his driver take him across the city to a restaurant called Seiren. Small, expensive, the kind of place where the lighting was designed to make everyone look like a better version of themselves, where his intelligence sources told him Imani's engagement dinner was being held. He didn't go inside. He stood near the entrance, coat collar up against the rain that had finally tapered to a mist, and told himself he would be there for 10 minutes, confirmed that nothing about the situation required his attention, and leave. Then he saw her through the window. She was at a table toward the back, surrounded by perhaps a dozen people. Her cousin. He'd heard her mention the woman dozens of times, had even met her briefly at a company event years ago, was saying something that made Imani throw her head back laughing, one hand pressed flat to her chest the way she did when something genuinely caught her off guard. Tae-jun had never seen that laugh before. He had seen her smile in his office, the controlled, professional smile she offered during presentations, or the quick, apologetic one that appeared whenever she knocked something over, which happened with remarkable frequency for someone otherwise so competent. But this was different. This was a woman completely relaxed inside her own life, making no adjustments for anyone's comfort but her own. She was wearing a soft green dress. She'd done something different with her hair. The engagement ring caught the light every time she moved her hand. The man beside her, Tunde Adebayo, tall, handsome in an effortful way, dressed like someone who wanted to be perceived as successful rather than someone who simply was, leaned over and kissed her temple, and Imani turned toward him with an expression that made something tighten in Taejun's chest in a way he didn't have language for. He should have left. He knew he should have left. He didn't leave. 20 minutes later, he watched Tunde Adebayo excuse himself from the table, phone already in hand, moving toward the back of the restaurant. Taejun's eyes followed him without thinking. Old habit, the instinct to track movement in a room. And then he watched Tunde stop at a small table near the rear exit, where a woman was already waiting, and pull her into an embrace that had nothing professional about it. Taejun's body went very still. I was a man who had seen betrayal in almost every form it could take. He had watched business partners sign agreements they'd already decided to violate. He had sat across from men who smiled at him while their associates were moving against him 2 floors below. He knew what deception looked like. He knew it in the posture, in the micro-adjustments of the face, in the way a person's attention divided when they were managing more than one reality. He recognized all of it now, in the easy way Tunde's hand settled on the other woman's back, in the quiet familiarity of the gesture, the casualness of someone doing something they'd done many times before. And 40 feet away, Imani was still laughing, completely unaware. Something happened in Taejun's chest then that he had no framework for, because he had spent the better part of 2 decades building walls specifically, so things like this couldn't happen to him. It wasn't quite rage. It was something older than rage. Something that moved through him in a way that bypassed every rational circuit he'd constructed and landed somewhere much closer to the bone. He was inside the restaurant before he fully decided to move. He crossed the room in the kind of silence that only very dangerous people can maintain. Not invisible, but somehow unnoticed until the last possible second. His attention locked entirely on the man at the rear table who still hadn't registered the presence behind him. Tunde was mid-sentence. Something low and laughing meant only for the woman in front of him. Taejun grabbed him by the shoulder, turned him, and hit him once. Clean, measured, enough to put him on the floor and leave no ambiguity about intent. The restaurant went quiet the way rooms do when something shocks the sound out of the air. The woman at the table was on her feet, pressing herself against the wall. Tunde was on the floor, one hand against his jaw, looking up with an expression that moved rapidly through surprise, pain, and then, when he finally registered who was standing over him, something very close to fear. Taejun straightened. He didn't say anything to Tunde. He turned and walked back toward the main dining area. The entire restaurant was staring at him. Imani was on her feet, face tight, already moving toward him with the particular expression she'd worn exactly twice in 8 years. The one that meant she had something to say, and had already decided to say it no matter what. "What did you do?" Not a question, barely even words, just the sound of something fracturing. "Your fiancé has a companion this evening who is not you." "You—" She stopped, started again. Her voice was shaking. "You came here. You followed me here. I heard something you needed to hear. I needed—" She laughed, and it was nothing like the laugh he'd watched through the window. This one was jagged. "You had no right. You have never had the right to. This is my life, Taejun. My dinner. My fiancé." Who was at a table in the back with another woman until 30 seconds ago. Behind them, Tunde had gotten back to his feet. He was straightening his jacket, composing himself with the practiced ease of a man who had survived social disasters before by simply reframing them. He touched Imani's shoulder. She turned to him. "He's unhinged," Tunde said, smooth and dismissive. "This is your employer, yes? He can't accept that you're leaving. Look at him." And here was the thing that cracked something open in Taejun's chest. Imani looked at him, really looked at him, and what he saw in her eyes was not certainty. It was doubt. Not about Tunde, about him. "Is that what this is?" she said quietly. "You couldn't just let me go?" "Imani, don't." Her voice dropped to almost nothing. "Don't do this to my night." She turned away from him. She took Tunde's arm. She didn't look back. Taejun stood in the middle of that restaurant with people staring at him from every table, and he said nothing. He did nothing. He simply stood there while the most efficient woman he'd ever known in his life walked away from him and chose the wrong man, and he had no one to blame for that except 8 years of silence. He left the way he came, alone, in the rain, with the restaurant noise fading behind him. In the car on the way back, he sat in the dark and looked at his hands, the same hands that had built an empire, that had signed deals worth hundreds of millions, that had done things he would never speak aloud. And he thought about the fact that Imani Okafor had spent 8 years inside his life, and he had never once seen that laugh. Not once. And now it was 6 weeks until she was gone forever. She didn't come in the next morning. Taejun knew before his assistant confirmed it. He'd known from the moment he walked into his office at 7:15 and found his desk exactly as he'd left it the night before. No fresh coffee, no tablet propped at the corner with the day's schedule already pulled up. No quiet knock at 7:30, followed by Imani's voice reading him the afternoon's conflicts before he'd even asked. Just silence. And the 2 envelopes still sitting where she'd placed them. He sat down. He opened his laptop. He read the same paragraph of the Busan development proposal 4 times without retaining a single word. At 8 o'clock, Director Seo appeared in the doorway. Okafor called in. Personal matter. She didn't give a timeline. I heard you. Seo didn't move. The 9 o'clock with the Lim group, she was running point on that. I can pull Analyst Park to cover, but she doesn't have the background on Pull Park. Brief her yourself. The 3 documents Okafor prepared for the Lim meeting are in a folder on the shared drive labeled Theo. The man stopped. Handle it, Taejun said. All of it. Don't come back to me with staffing problems. Theo left. Taejun turned his chair to face the windows. The rain had stopped sometime before dawn. The city below him was wet and gray and moving with the particular indifference of a Tuesday morning, taxis and buses, and thousands of people who had somewhere to be and were going there without complication. He pressed 2 fingers against his mouth and thought about a woman walking away from him in a restaurant while her fiancé's hand rested on her back. The Lim Group meeting collapsed inside the first 15 minutes. Analyst Park was competent. She was one of the better analysts on the floor, organized, quick, but she hadn't attended the preliminary calls. She didn't know that Director Lim's older son had a competing interest in the secondary property they were discussing, or that the mention of the Incheon port development would read as a veiled pressure tactic and not a neutral point of reference. She mentioned Incheon in her second slide. The temperature in the room dropped visibly. Taejun corrected course himself, smoothly enough that the meeting didn't fully fall apart, but the damage was already done. Lim's body language had closed off, and a closed Lim was a Lim who went home and thought for 3 days before deciding anything. Afterward, in the corridor, Director Seo kept his voice carefully flat. We lost a week, minimum. I know. Okafor would have caught the Incheon reference before it hit the slide. I know that too. Seo paused. They were walking side by side down the hall toward the elevator bank, and Seo had the good judgment not to look at him directly when he said, Is she coming back? Taejun pushed the elevator button. She resigned. I'm aware. I'm asking whether she's coming back before her notice ends. I don't know. The elevator opened. They stepped in. Seo looked at the floor numbers and said, very carefully, in the tone he used when he was about to say something he knew might land badly, then maybe someone should go ask her. Taejun said nothing for the entire ride down. He did not go that day. He told himself it was because he had a 2-hour call with the Singapore office, and then a dinner he couldn't cancel with a city councilman who owed him 2 favors and expected to be courted before delivering them. Both of those things were true. Neither of them was the real reason. The real reason was that he had stood in the middle of Seren restaurant with a room full of strangers staring at him, and he had said nothing, not one word in his own defense, not one word to make her stay. And the memory of that sat in his chest like something lodged between his ribs, something he couldn't dislodge by moving forward or staying still. He'd hit a man in a restaurant because of Imani Okafor. Hey, Kang Taejun, who had not made an impulsive decision in 15 years, had walked across a restaurant floor and put a man on the ground because watching that man's hands on another woman while Imani sat 40 feet away, unknowing had done something to his nervous system that bypassed every protocol he'd built. That was not the behavior of someone responding to a staffing issue. He sat at the dinner with Councilman Baek and said the right things and smiled the right smiles and authorized the right assurances, And the entire time, some part of his brain was doing a calculation he didn't know how to stop, running backward through 8 years of Tuesday mornings and late document reviews and small sticky notes, and the particular way Amani always said his name when she had something to tell him that she already knew he wouldn't want to hear. Not sir, not Chairman Kong, just his name, flat and direct, like it was simply the word for the person she was talking to. No one else in his life said his name like that. She wasn't home the first time he went. He went on the second evening. He stood outside her building in the dark for longer than he intended to admit. A 4-story walk-up in Mapogu, the kind of building that had been there for 30 years and showed it, the entrance buzzer panel half its buttons unlabeled, and when he finally pressed the one marked Okafor 302, he half expected no answer. She answered on the third buzz. "Who is it?" "It's Tai-jun." A long silence. "I know you're there," he said. "I can hear the intercom static." Another silence. Then the door buzzed open. He climbed 2 flights of stairs that smelled like someone on the second floor had been cooking something with a lot of garlic and not enough ventilation. The hallway on the 3rd floor had one light out, and the carpet runner was worn to nothing in the center of the path. He stood at her door and knocked once. She opened it. She was wearing a gray, oversized sweatshirt and cotton pants, the kind of clothes that meant she'd been home all day and hadn't cared enough to change. Her hair was wrapped and her eyes were slightly swollen in the specific way that comes from crying and then stopping and then starting again. She had a mug in one hand and she did not invite him in. "I'm not here about the job," he said. She looked at him for a moment. "Then what are you here about?" "I owe you an explanation. You owe me an apology." "Yes, that too." She stepped back, not warmly. The way you let someone into a room when you've decided you'd rather have the conversation than wonder about it. Her apartment was small and extraordinarily organized in a way that made complete sense. Of course it was, he thought, and then immediately felt something complicated about the fact that he'd never once imagined what her home looked like. In 8 years, she had been a presence inside his world. He had never thought to consider that she had one of her own. There were plants on the windowsill, a bookshelf along one wall, packed tight and slightly overflowing, a few books sideways on top of the upright ones. A low table in front of a small sofa, a half-empty bowl of rice sitting on it, like she'd been eating when he buzzed. He sat where she gestured, a chair near the table, and she settled on the sofa, tucking her legs under her, wrapping both hands around her mug, and looked at him with an expression that was not warm and was not cold, but was simply exhausted. "Say what you came to say," she said. He'd had 2 days to think about this. He'd gone over it in the car, in the shower, somewhere around 3 in the morning, staring at his ceiling. He had several versions prepared. He said none of them. "I didn't follow you to that restaurant because of the job," he said. "I need you to know that." She said nothing. "I didn't know I was going until I was already in the car, and I didn't know why until I was standing outside looking at you through the window." Her jaw shifted. "How long were you standing there?" "Long enough. Long enough to decide to—" She stopped, set her mug down on the table with a click that was slightly harder than necessary. "He says you assaulted him. He's talking about filing a complaint. He can file whatever he wants." "That's not a response. I was at a table in the back of that restaurant with a woman whose number is in his phone under the name Architect Consultant." Tai-jun kept his voice even. "He kissed her. He had his hand on her back. The way men touch women, they've been touching for a long time." Amani's face didn't change. That was the thing that got him. The total stillness of it. Not disbelief, not surprise. Just a very controlled blankness that told him some part of her had already been sitting with a version of this possibility. "You don't know that," she said. "I have people who confirmed it before the evening was over." "Of course you do." There was something bitter in that. "Of course you had people looking into my fiancé." "I had people looking into him after I saw what I saw." "Right." She uncurled her legs, stood up, moved to the window, not away from him, just somewhere she could look at something else for a moment. Her shoulders were up around her ears. "You know what the most insulting part is? It's not that you hit him. It's not even that you were there. It's that everyone at that table looked at you and then looked at me, and I could see what they were thinking. Oh, the crazy boss came to drag her back. This is embarrassing. My cousin pulled me aside in the bathroom and asked if you were dangerous. I'm not dangerous to you." She turned. The look she gave him was sharp and complicated. "That's not the kind of reassuring statement you think it is." He sat with that for a moment. I'm not asking you to take my word for it, he said. About Tunde. I'm asking you to look at the evidence before you make a decision you can't undo. And what evidence is that? Your people's surveillance reports? Photographs, time-stamped. She went very still. From that night and 3 nights before it, he said. The same woman, the same hotel in Yongsan. The room was quiet enough that he could hear the refrigerator hum from the kitchen. Outside, a motorcycle passed on the street below, its engine loud and then gone. Why didn't you just tell me? She said finally. Her voice was different now, quieter. The anger had shifted into something that sounded more like genuine confusion. At the restaurant, why didn't you just say that instead of hitting him? Why does everything you do have to go through your fists first? Because I saw him kiss another woman in the same restaurant where your engagement dinner was happening, and I stopped thinking. You stopped? She exhaled, pressed one hand against her forehead. 8 years, Taejun. 8 years we worked together, and you have never once stopped thinking about anything. You think about everything. You calculate everything. Her hand dropped. She looked at him directly. So don't tell me you stopped thinking. Tell me the truth. He held her gaze. This was the moment he'd been building walls against since the moment she walked out his door with those 2 envelopes. I couldn't watch him touch you, he said. That's the truth. That's all of it. The silence that followed that was the loudest thing in the room. Imani stood at the window and looked at him with an expression he had never seen on her face. Not in 8 years of Tuesday mornings and late nights and spilled coffee and small apologies. And he still couldn't fully name what it was. It wasn't anger anymore. It wasn't forgiveness either. It was something more unsettling than both. The look of someone recalculating something they thought they already understood. You should go, she said. Imani, I need you to go, right now. Her voice held. I'm not saying I don't believe you. I'm saying I need to think, and I can't think with you sitting in my living room looking at me like that. Like what? Like you just figured something out that you should have figured out 5 years ago. She crossed her arms over her chest. Please go. He stood. He straightened his jacket, the way he always did when he was pulling himself back into the version of himself that knew how to function in the world. He walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame. The photographs are on a drive, he said. Director CO has it. If you want them, they're yours. I won't use them for anything. I wanted you to have them, whatever you decide. She didn't answer. He left. She looked at the drive 2 days later. She called her cousin Ada at 11 at night, and Ada came over in 40 minutes still wearing her pajamas under a coat. And they sat together on that small sofa while Imani went through everything on the screen, dates, locations, times, a series of photographs that were clear and damning and exactly as bad as Taejun had said. Ada said very little during this. She held Imani's hand. When Imani put the drive down on the table and sat back and just breathed for a long moment, Ada said, How long have you known? I haven't known anything. Baby, I've had feelings. Feelings I told myself weren't feelings. Imani's voice was flat. She was doing the things she did when she was working very hard to stay controlled. Her jaw tight, her hands perfectly still. He came home late from Lagos in July, and his story didn't hold up, and I let him explain it away, and I told myself I was being paranoid. You weren't. No. A pause. I wasn't. Ada let that sit for a moment, then, what are you going to do? I don't know yet. And your boss, don't. I'm just asking. I know what you're asking, and I'm saying don't. Imani got up, went to the kitchen, came back with 2 glasses of water and set one in front of Ada and held the other one without drinking it. He walked into a restaurant and hit my fiancé in front of 40 people. He walked into a restaurant and hit your cheating fiancé in front of 40 people, Ada said. Those are the same sentence, but they're not the same situation. He doesn't get credit for that. I'm not giving him credit. I'm just pointing out that the reason he did it matters. Imani looked at her. The reason he did it is that he doesn't know how to let anything in his life exist outside of his control, including me. Is that what you think? It's what I know. Ada picked up her water glass, held it. Okay, but he came to your apartment and he told you the truth, and he left the evidence with CO and didn't use it himself. A beat. That's not a man trying to control something. That's a man trying to fix something. There's a difference. Imani said nothing for a long time. Then she said, I need to talk to Tunde. She called Tund the next morning. He answered on the first ring, which should have told her something. Men who have nothing to hide pick up phones without urgency, not with the particular speed of someone who's been watching a call they expected. "We need to talk," she said. "In person, tonight." "Of course, baby. I've been wanting to Don't." The word came out clean and quiet. "Just come. 8 o'clock. He arrived at 8:15, which was also information. 15 minutes late was a specific kind of casual that announced he'd decided to come from a position of control. He had a small bouquet of flowers, the expensive kind, the kind you pick when you're trying to demonstrate effort rather than feeling. He smiled at her. It was a practice smile. She'd seen it before and hadn't known what she was seeing. "You look beautiful," he said. She didn't answer that. She set the drive on the table. She said, "Tell me about the woman at the restaurant." His face didn't fall exactly. It arranged itself. That was the word. It was a voluntary rearrangement, the slight tightening around the eyes of someone deciding in real time which version of a story to tell. "Your boss assaulted me," he said. "Whatever he told you, I'm not asking about him. I'm asking about her. There's nothing to tell. She's a business contact. I have photographs, Tunde." Her voice didn't shake. She was proud of that later. From that night, and from the Yongsan Hotel, 3 nights in a row. The silence this time was completely different from the one in her apartment with Taijun. That silence had been full of things trying to find their shape. This one was empty. The silence of someone caught with nothing left to arrange. He set the flowers down on the table very carefully. "Imani, don't explain it," she said. "Please don't explain it. If you just let me—" I said don't. She stood up. She was surprised by how steady she felt. She'd expected the floor to feel different under her feet, her hands to shake, some physical report of the magnitude of what was happening, but she just felt clear. The particular clarity of someone who has already done the worst part of the thinking and is now simply moving through what comes after it. "I'm ending the engagement. I want the ring back in writing within the week. I won't be in contact after tonight." He stared at her. The practiced smoothness had entirely left his face now. What was underneath it was uglier. Not grief, not guilt. Just a blunt and immediate anger. The anger of a man who expected a different outcome. "You're making a mistake," he said. "I'm correcting one." "You're choosing that man?" "I'm not choosing anyone." Her voice came up slightly. "Not much. Enough." "I'm unchoosing you. That's not the same thing. Get out of my apartment." He stood there for a moment longer than was comfortable. Then he picked up the flowers, which was strange and petty and somehow perfectly in character, and he left. She stood in the middle of her apartment for a long time after the door closed. The overhead light buzzed faintly. There were dishes in the sink she hadn't done. Outside, the street noise was ordinary. Someone arguing on a phone, a food delivery scooter, the specific rhythm of a city going about its evening. She sat down on the sofa. She put her hands in her lap. She was single. She was not going to Lagos. Her resignation letter was sitting on Kang Tae-jun's desk, and in less than 5 weeks, under the current terms, she was leaving the country and the job and the life she'd built for 8 years. And the only reason that plan still existed was a man who no longer had any claim on her future. She picked up her phone, put it down, picked it up again. She didn't call anyone. She sat there until the light through the window had gone fully dark, and she thought about a man sitting in her chair with his hands on his knees, telling her he couldn't watch someone else touch her, and how she'd said, "You should have figured that out 5 years ago," and meant it as a dismissal, and had not entirely meant it as a dismissal. She had not told Tae-jun that his resignation was not yet accepted. She had not told him she wasn't leaving. She hadn't decided. But she was thinking about a laugh she'd laughed at her own engagement dinner, free and careless and real. And how on the walk home, just before she'd fallen asleep, she'd wondered distantly when the last time was that she'd laughed like that in front of the man she was supposed to marry. She could not remember a single time. That was the thing that stayed with her through the night. Not the photographs, not the flowers, not the practiced smoothness of Tunde's rearranged face. Just that small, quiet absence. The laugh she'd never had reason to laugh. And in a 43rd floor office across the city, the resignation letter was still on the desk, and Kang Tae-jun had not yet signed its acknowledgement, and he was looking at it in the dark with the particular expression of a man who has realized, very late, that the most critical asset in his life was never in his portfolio. It was never something he owned at all, and he was running out of time to say so. She came back on a Thursday. Not with fanfare, not with any announcement that Taejun's office received in advance. One moment her desk was empty, the way it had been for 4 days, her chair pushed in at the precise angle she always left it, her monitor dark, her inbox light blinking with accumulated messages nobody else had authorization to open. And then it wasn't empty anymore. Taejun heard her voice in the corridor before he saw her. Just a sentence, something mundane. She was asking the floor receptionist about the status of the Daejeon filing, and his whole body registered it before his brain caught up. A slight shift in posture, a stillness that replaced whatever he'd been doing with his hands. He did not go to the door. She came to him at 9:15, knocked once, opened the door without waiting for an answer the way she always had, the particular rhythm of it unchanged. She looked tired. She'd done something careful with her appearance, pressed blouse, hair neat. But around her eyes there was the specific texture of someone who had not slept enough for several nights running. She was carrying her tablet and a folder, and she stood in front of his desk with the slightly rigid posture of someone who has decided exactly how they are going to behave and is concentrating on maintaining it. "I've reviewed the outstanding items," she said. "The Lim Group meeting needs to be rescheduled. I've already contacted their office and proposed next Tuesday. They've tentatively agreed. The Busan development contract has 3 clauses that need your attention before it goes to legal. And the Singapore call from last week produced a follow-up memo that requires a response by Friday." He looked at her. "Sit down," he said. "I'd rather stand." "Imani." Something moved across her face. Not softness. More like the acknowledgement that they were going to have to go through something before they could get back to work. And she was deciding to get it over with. She sat. He put down his pen. He turned his chair to face her directly. "The engagement," he said, "is over." Her voice was flat. "The ring is being returned. I've spoken to both families." A pause. It was not a clean conversation. "I imagine not. His mother told me I was making a decision I would regret for the rest of my life." Imani looked at her tablet, not reading anything on it, just somewhere to rest her eyes that wasn't his face. "His father said some things that were less diplomatic." "What kind of things?" "The kind that told me I made the right decision." She set the tablet on her knee. "I'm not here to discuss it further. I'm here because I have 11 working days left in my notice period, and I would like them to be professional." "Your resignation hasn't been acknowledged." She looked up. "I didn't sign the receipt," he said. "Administratively, it's pending." The look she gave him was sharp and complicated and exhausted all at once. "That's not how employment law works." "I'm aware." "Taejun, I'm not holding you. I want to be clear about that." He kept his voice even. He'd practiced this part too. "If you want to leave, you leave. I won't use administrative procedure to delay something you've decided. But you hadn't decided when you submitted it, and I think you know that." She was quiet for a moment. "What I know," she said slowly, "is that my reasons for submitting it have changed. That's not the same as saying I know what comes next. Fair enough. I need time." "You have it." Another silence. The heating system clicked somewhere in the walls. Outside his windows, the city did its ordinary morning business. 11 days, she said finally. "Let's just get through 11 days and see where we are." He nodded. She stood, picked up her tablet and folder, moved toward the door with the slightly too careful walk of someone managing their own composure one step at a time. "Imani." She stopped, didn't turn. "I'm sorry," he said, "for the restaurant. For all of it." A pause. "I know you are," she said, and then she opened the door and went back to her desk. And within 20 minutes, the floor sounded like itself again. The familiar rhythm of her voice on calls, the quiet click of her keyboard, the small organizational gravity that she generated without seeming to try. Taejun sat at his desk and felt something loosen in his chest that had been locked down for the better part of 2 weeks. He did not mistake loosening for resolution. He'd made too many mistakes already to confuse the beginning of something with the arrival. The twist came on a Friday. Not dramatically, not announced. The worst ones never are. It came in the form of a man named Kwon Dae-soo, who arrived unscheduled at the building's lobby at 2 in the afternoon and told the security desk he had an appointment with Kang Tae-jun. He did not have an appointment. What he had was a name that made the security desk call upstairs immediately and wait. Tae-jun knew the name. Everyone in certain circles knew it. Kwon Dae-soo, 63 years old, publicly a retired civil engineer, privately the financial architect behind three of the most significant underground operations that had run through Seoul in the past 2 decades. He had been Tae-jun's silent backer in the early years, the man who'd provided the initial capital and the critical introductions when Tae-jun was still building from nothing, and who had, 7 years ago, been paid in full and formally separated from all of Tae-jun's operations with a handshake and a document that both men understood meant the relationship was closed. Kwon had not come to the building in 7 years. He arrived in Tae-jun's office looking like what he was, an older man, compact and unhurried, wearing a dark suit that was expensive but not showy. The suit of someone who stopped needing to demonstrate anything a long time ago. His hair was fully white. He moved like a man whose joints had started to register the years, but who refused to accommodate them. He sat down across from Tae-jun without being invited. He looked around the office slowly, taking in the view, the furnishings, the size of it. And then he looked at Tae-jun with an expression of faint amusement, the specific amusement of a man who watched something grow from a seed and is taking a moment to appreciate the size of the tree. "You've done well," Kwon said. "Why are you here?" "That's how we're starting." "I don't have an appointment window for you, Kwon. I don't have a scheduled relationship with you at all, so yes, that's how we're starting." Kwon made a small sound, not quite a laugh. "You were always like this. Even when you had nothing, it's either very admirable or very stupid, depending on the day." He adjusted his cuffs, set both hands on the armrests. "I'm here because a problem is coming your way, and I thought, as someone who invested in your early success, I might extend the courtesy of a warning." Tae-jun said nothing. I was watching Kwon's hands, his face, the small calibrations in his posture, looking for the tell. There was always a tell. "There's a man named Baek Sang-il," Kwon said. "You know that name. Senior Auditor, Financial Crimes Division. Formerly. He retired 18 months ago and has been doing private consulting work." Kwon paused for effect, and Tae-jun recognized the pause. It was the pause of someone who has been waiting a long time to say the next thing. He's been consulting specifically for a team that has been building a case against KT Global Holdings and against you personally. The room was very quiet. "The legitimate operations are clean," Tae-jun said. "The legitimate operations are clean," Kwon agreed. "But you have not been operating exclusively through legitimate operations for 15 years, and both you and I know that. And someone has been very carefully documenting that for the past," he tilted his head, 26 months. 26 months. The number landed with physical weight. 2 years and 2 months of someone moving quietly through Tae-jun's organization while he looked the other way. "Who is the client?" he said. "That's the part I'm here to tell you." Kwon's expression shifted then, not into anything overtly uncomfortable, but into something more careful. "The client is not a government agency. The client is private, and the primary funding for this investigation came, initially, from a Nigerian investment group called Adebayo Capital Holdings." The name went through Tae-jun like something electrical. He sat very still. His hands were flat on the desk. He was aware of each finger. "Say that again," he said, quietly. "Adebayo Capital Holdings, based in Lagos, run primarily by a man named, I know who runs it." His voice was measured, controlled, the voice he used when he needed all of his wiring to hold at once. "Explain the connection." Kwon spread his hands. "The Adebayo family has business interests in South Korea. They've been trying to expand into the logistics infrastructure market here for approximately 3 years. KT Global Holdings controls a substantial piece of that market. You've been an obstacle." He paused. "Their initial approach was commercial. They attempted partnership discussions that didn't go anywhere. Then they attempted lobbying through intermediaries. That also didn't produce results." Another pause. Pause longer this time. "And then, approximately 14 months ago, the son, Tunde, arrived in Seoul." Tae-jun's jaw was very tight. "He was not here for love," Kwon said. And there was something almost gentle in his voice when he said it, which was somehow worse than if he'd said it coldly. "He was here because someone on his side identified a specific vulnerability in your operation, a specific point of access." "Imani," Tae-jun said. The word came out flat and hard. "She was identified as your most trusted executive assistant, someone with access to your scheduling, your communications, your operational contacts. Someone who, if cultivated appropriately, Quan stopped, chose his next words with care. She is not complicit. I want to be clear about that. My information suggests she has no knowledge of any of this. She was a target, not a participant. Taejin looked at him for a long moment. How confident are you in that? Highly. The operation was built specifically around her not knowing. The intelligence value was in proximity, her proximity to you. If she had known, the entire approach would have collapsed, because the information they needed required her to behave exactly as she naturally behaves. Quan met his eyes. She's not involved, but she's been used. For 14 months, every time she was in the same room as sensitive discussions, every time she carried documents, every time she was present at meetings she shouldn't have been excluded from, someone was watching, through her without her knowledge. Something moved through Taejun's body that he recognized distantly as rage, but that felt, in this moment, colder and more structural than rage. It was the feeling of an architecture being revealed, not the anger of betrayal, but the particular cold horror of looking at something you thought was solid and seeing that someone had been building underneath it. How? He said. A device, placed in her personal effects approximately 13 months ago. We believe it was placed during a trip she made to Busan for a conference. A bag was left unattended in a hotel room. Quan reached into his jacket, set a small photograph on the desk. A bag, dark canvas, the strap recognizable, the kind of bag Imani brought to off-site meetings. It's been transmitting intermittently ever since. Taejun looked at the photograph. He thought about 13 months of Imani carrying that bag into briefings, into his office, into rooms where numbers and names and operational details moved through the air and then disappeared into a signal being received by people who worked for the family of the man she'd almost married. He stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there with his back to Quan and looked at the city and worked very deliberately on the mechanics of breathing, in through the nose, out through the mouth, the most basic regulation he knew, the one that had kept him functional in rooms far more dangerous than this one. She doesn't know, he said again. Not a question this time, just needing to say it. She doesn't know. And the case they're building is substantial, 26 months of data. Financial trails, operational contacts, a series of transactions that would be difficult to explain in a courtroom. Quan's voice was careful. The original plan, as I understand it, was to use what they gathered to force a negotiation. A very specific negotiation. You step back from the logistics market, you allow their expansion, and the evidence disappears. And if I don't step back? The evidence goes to Baek Sang-il's former colleagues. Taejun turned from the window. He looked at Quan, at the photograph on the desk, at his own hands, which were completely still in the way. Hands are only still when the person they belong to is working very hard at something. They miscalculated one thing, Taejun said. Several things, I'd imagine. They built their leverage around a woman who is no longer engaged to their operative. The access point no longer exists, which means… He stopped. Quan was nodding slowly. Which means they are no longer in a position to control the timeline. Which means whatever they've gathered, they now have to decide very quickly whether to use or to renegotiate from a weakened position. How quickly? My source estimates 72 hours before they make a decision. After the engagement ended, there was significant internal communication. They weren't expecting that outcome. Taejun moved to his desk. He pressed the intercom. Get CO up here, he said. Now. He looked at Quan. You have a copy of everything you've described. I wouldn't have come without it. And your motive? Quan looked at him steadily. You built something genuinely impressive. I may no longer have a financial stake in it, but I have something like professional pride in not watching it get taken apart by people who weren't capable of building their own. He paused. Also, Tunde Adebayo is not a man I have respect for. On a personal level. That's an interesting distinction. I'm an interesting man. Director Seo was in the office in 4 minutes. He took one look at Quan and then at Taejun's face and became very still, the stillness of a professional who knows the next thing he hears is going to require everything he has. Taejun gave him 12 minutes of information, stripped down to the operational essentials, and then said, I need the bag found and swept. I need it done without her knowledge. I need our legal exposure assessed within 24 hours. And I need everything we have on Adebayo Capital Holdings on my desk before tonight. CO said nothing for 3 seconds. Then, the bag. She'll sit at her desk. It's the dark canvas one she takes to off-site meetings. CO's expression shifted fractionally. The shift of a man processing something that had implications well beyond the operational. You understand that if she finds out the bag was swept without her knowledge, I know. She'll know we were in her belongings. I know, CO. Do it carefully. CO left. Quan rose from his chair, buttoning his jacket with the unhurried manner of a man who has completed what he came to do. One more thing, Quan said at the door. They targeted her specifically because she was a vulnerability. Because you trusted her in rooms you trusted no one else. He turned. His expression was, for the first time, something that approached direct. If you're going to do what I think you're going to do, protect her this time. Not as an asset, as a person. Taijun looked at him. Get out of my building. Quan smiled, the small, privately satisfied smile of a man who got exactly the answer he expected, and left. Taijun stood alone in his office for 3 minutes. Then he sat down. He pulled up his screen. He opened the file on KT Global Holdings Logistics Division and on the Adebayo Capital Holdings filings that his team had been able to pull from public records within the last hour. And he started to read with the particular focused intensity of a man building something in his head that has no margin for error. He thought about 14 months. I thought about a dark canvas bag at the shoulder of a woman who brought it to every off-site meeting because it was practical and organized and fit everything she needed. He thought about all the rooms she'd walked into with that bag, all the conversations she'd been present for, all the times he'd allowed her to sit in on briefings because her note-taking was better than anyone else's, and he trusted her judgment and had never once, not once, thought about what it would mean if someone was listening through her. He had spent 15 years building walls around his operation, and someone had found the one door he'd left open because it hadn't occurred to him that Imani Okafor could be used against him. Because it hadn't occurred to him to think of her as a vulnerability. Because in 8 years, he had never let himself think about her that way at all. And there it was, the thing underneath all of it, the structure that had been sitting in the foundation of his whole empire without him ever naming it. He had trusted her completely, not strategically, not because he'd assessed her loyalty and found it sound, but because she was Imani, and the question had simply never arisen in his mind, the way the floor beneath your feet doesn't arise as a question until the moment it gives way. He had protected everything he valued. He had not protected her because he had not admitted, even to himself, that she was the thing he valued most. His phone lit up. Director CO. He picked it up. The bag, CO said. His voice was compressed. We found the device. Where? Inside the lining, along the bottom seam. It's been there a while. The adhesive has set permanently. It would take a specific sweep to locate it. A pause. She's been carrying it for over a year. Taejun closed his eyes. She's at her desk right now, CO continued. She came back from a document run about 20 minutes ago. She has no idea. Keep it that way for now. For how long? Until I figure out how to tell her. A silence. Taejun. CO almost never used his name without a title. She's going to find out. If not from you, then from the investigation. If we move against the Adebayo operation, I know. She was in your office for 8 years. She was in every sensitive meeting you ever had. If the case they've built goes anywhere, I said I know. She could be implicated by proximity, even without intent. A prosecutor doesn't need intent if the access was enough. The word came out harder than he intended. CO went quiet. Taejun pressed the heel of his hand against his forehead, breathed. I'm working on it. Give me tonight. He ended the call. He sat there in the late afternoon light, his city sprawling below him in all directions, his empire intact in every visible way and quietly compromised in the one that mattered, and he looked at the dark canvas bag sitting in his memory, at a woman's shoulder, in a doorway, beside a conference table, in every room she'd ever walked into carrying it without knowing what it was carrying back. He had one night to figure out how to fix something that had been broken for over a year. He had one night to figure out how to tell the only person he'd ever truly trusted that she had been used as a weapon against everything he'd built, and that the man she'd almost married had been the weapon's handle. And he had no idea. For the first time in 15 years of navigating situations that had seemed unsurvivable, no idea at all how to make this right. Because making it right wasn't just about the operation anymore. It was about a woman who had just ended an engagement and was sitting 20 meters away from him, reorganizing the limb group file with her characteristic thoroughness, completely unaware that the last 14 months of her life had been choreographed by people who saw her as a door into a man's empire, and who had sent a man to put a ring on her finger for no reason except that it was the most efficient way through. He told her at 7 in the morning, not in his office, not across a desk with a folder of evidence between them and the formal geometry of their professional relationship holding everything in place. He called her before she left her apartment. 7:04, her phone lit up with his name, and she answered on the second ring because she always answered on the second ring, some trained reflex that 8 years had built into her without asking. "Don't come in yet," he said. "I need to talk to you. Not at the building." A pause. He could hear her breathing, the small ambient sounds of her apartment morning, a kettle somewhere, traffic below the window. "What happened?" "Not on the phone. There's a cafe on Dongyoro, the one with the green awning across from the park. Can you be there in 40 minutes? Another pause. Longer. "Taejun, what happened?" 40 minutes, he said. "Please." She was there in 35 then. She was wearing a dark coat over what looked like clothes she'd put on quickly, and she had her bag, the canvas one, dark, worn at the strap, over her shoulder. And when he saw it from across the room, something moved through his chest that felt like his ribs contracting. He was already at a table in the back corner, 2 coffees. He'd been there for 20 minutes, which was not something he did. Arriving early, waiting, sitting without work in front of him. The cafe was mostly empty at this hour. A pair of university students near the window, a man reading a newspaper at the counter, the particular quiet of a place that hasn't yet committed to its day. She sat down across from him. She looked at his face, and her own face went carefully neutral, the expression she wore when she was preparing to receive information she didn't want. "Tell me," she said. He told her. All of it. He didn't soften it, and he didn't build to it, and he didn't look away from her face while he said it. He started with Kwan's visit, and he moved through the structure of it, the Adebayo operation, the 26 months of case building, the specific targeting of her as a point of access, the device in the bag's lining. And he watched her face while he said it. The way you watch someone's face when you know the words you're saying are going to do damage, and you can't stop them, and looking away would be the worst possible thing. She didn't say anything for a long time after he finished. She was looking at the coffee cup in front of her. Her hands were on the table, both of them, flat, and they were very still. Her jaw was set in a way that told him the stillness was costing her something. 14 months, she said. Yes. He came here 14 months ago. Yes. And the bag. She looked up. Her eyes were dry. They were going to stay dry. He could see that. Not because she wasn't feeling it, but because she was feeling it in the deep register, the one that doesn't come out as tears. The bag has been, since the Busan conference, 13 months. She put both hands in her lap. She looked at the table. Then she looked at the canvas bag hanging from the back of her chair, and something went across her face that was so raw he almost looked away. And then didn't, because he'd made the mistake of looking away from things that mattered for 8 years, and he wasn't doing it again. I walked that bag into every briefing, she said. Yes. I walked it into your office. Yes. She stopped, started again. I was sitting in meetings with it on the floor next to my chair. She pressed her lips together. Every note I took, every document I handled, every conversation I was present for. Imani. Don't. The word came out flat and sharp. Don't do that thing where you say my name to make me stop talking, because I need to finish this. She exhaled. I was the leak. For over a year I was the leak in your operation, and I had no idea, and the man who put it there was the man I was going to marry. You didn't know. That's not the point. She looked up. Her eyes were hard and clear. The point is that I was used, specifically, deliberately, because of how close I was to you. Because someone looked at my life and decided that my relationship with my employer was the most useful door they could find. She paused. Did he ever care about me at all? Even a little? He didn't answer immediately. She watched him not answer, and something in her face shifted. Not surprised, just absorbing it. Right, she said. I don't know that, he said. I don't have access to what he felt. You have access to what he did. She looked at her coffee, picked it up, set it back down without drinking. 14 months. He came here 14 months ago, and 8 months in he asked me to marry him, and I thought—" She stopped. Her throat moved. "I thought someone had finally chosen me. Like, actually chosen me. Not the employee, not the person who gets things done. Me." A pause. "And the whole time. Imani, I know it's not—" She pressed one hand briefly against her mouth, dropped it. "I'm not asking you to fix this part. I just need a minute." He gave her the minute. He sat across from her in a corner booth of a quiet cafe, and he waited while she took apart something and put it back into a shape she could carry, the way she did every hard thing. Without theater, without asking anyone to witness the work, just doing it until it was done. Then she looked up. "What happens now?" she said. "We have a problem. 72 hours, probably less. They're going to make a decision about what to do with what they've gathered. And what they've gathered, Imani, is substantial. It involves me directly, but you were present, in rooms where things were discussed that—" He stopped. "A prosecutor doesn't need intent. They need access. And you had more access than anyone." Her eyes narrowed. "Are you telling me I'm exposed? I'm telling you I need to fix this before that question becomes relevant." Those are two different answers to the same question. "Yes," he said, "they are." She sat with that. "What do you need from me?" "Nothing. I need you to go somewhere safe while this resolves. I need you away from the building." "No." "Imani." I said no. Her voice was quiet and absolute. "You do not get to decide what I do with my own exposure. That bag was in my possession. My name is in whatever files they've built. You don't get to put me somewhere safe while you clean this up, and then tell me what happened after." She leaned forward slightly. "Tell me what you're planning." He looked at her for a moment. Then he told her. Director Seo had been working through the night. By the time Taijun arrived at the building at 9, Imani 2 steps behind him, her bag replaced with a clean one, the old canvas left at the cafe to be collected and swept by Seo's people. There were 6 people in the secondary conference room, and the table was covered in documents that Seo had been building into a structure through the pre-dawn hours. Seo looked at Imani when she walked in. Then at Taijun. Taijun said, "She stays." Seo nodded once and moved on. The structure was this. Adebayo Capital Holdings had built their case through the device, supplemented by 2 additional sources inside the KT Global Holdings network. Not Imani, not anyone in Taijun's direct circle, but 2 lower-level compliance employees who had been separately cultivated over the past 18 months. Kwan's information had identified both. One had already, quietly, been suspended pending investigation. The other was still in the building. "Who?" Taijun said. Seo told him. A name Taijun recognized, a junior analyst in the trade finance division, 3 years with the company, good performance reviews. Invisible in the way people who are gathering information try to be invisible. "Pull his access," Taijun said. "Now, get him off the floor quietly. I don't want it to register as a termination yet." "Done." Seo moved to his phone. "The case itself," Taijun said, turning back to the table. "What's the exposure?" One of the legal team, a woman named Attorney Choi, who had been Taijun's external counsel for 6 years, and who operated with the specific controlled energy of someone who ran on black coffee and the satisfaction of complex problems, spread 3 documents in front of him. "The legitimate operations are insulated. We've confirmed that. The exposure is concentrated in 4 transactions, 2 from 3 years ago, 1 18 months ago, 1 from last spring. The first 2 are arguable. The last 2 are not. Define not. Significant cash movement through a third-party entity that no longer exists. The entity was dissolved 8 months ago. The dissolution itself is clean, but the transactions before it are," she chose her word, "visible. Can they be recontextualized? Within a narrow window. If the original counterparty documentation is complete and can be produced quickly." "How quickly?" 24 hours. "Get it. There's a second issue." Attorney Choi looked at him steadily. "The device. If we move against the Adebayo operation aggressively, if we expose the surveillance through Ms. Okafor, we open a conversation about the information they gathered, which means a conversation about what they heard. We control that conversation by going first," Taijun said. "There's risk in going first. There's more risk in waiting." He looked at the documents. "They expected me to negotiate. They expected that when the engagement fell apart, they'd lose their access, but the threat of what they'd already gathered would be enough to bring me to a table. He looked up. They don't know we know about the device. CO came back from his phone. The analyst is off the floor. He's in the security room. He doesn't know why yet. Good, keep him there. Taijun turned to Attorney Choi. I want a communication prepared. Formal, legal, addressed to Adebayo Capital Holdings directly. We're not threatening. We're notifying. Notifying them that we are in possession of evidence of an illegal surveillance operation conducted against a private citizen in South Korea, that the operation was conducted through criminal means, and that we are prepared to refer the matter to the appropriate authorities unless we receive formal confirmation that all gathered materials are destroyed and the matter is closed. Attorney Choi looked at him. That's aggressive. Yes. If they call the bluff, it's not a bluff. The device is documented. The placement was criminal under Korean law regardless of what they gathered with it. They committed a crime on Korean soil. That's a fact. He paused. Use that fact. And our exposure in the materials they gathered is a separate conversation that only becomes relevant if this one fails. He held her eyes. Make it not fail. Choi looked at him for another second. Then she picked up her pen. Give me 4 hours. The call came at noon. Not from Lagos. Not from anyone affiliated with Adebayo Capital Holdings directly. From a Korean legal firm, one of the larger ones, the kind with 47 partners and offices in 6 cities. A partner named Shin, who identified himself as representing a client he was not at liberty to name and who wished to discuss a mutual matter of business sensitivity. Taejun took the call himself. CO and Attorney Choi were in the room. He put it on speaker. The dance lasted 8 minutes. The partner spoke in careful legal language about private information, about the potential for various parties to suffer reputational damage, about the wisdom of quiet resolution over public litigation. He was skilled. He was doing exactly what a skilled intermediary does, maintaining maximum deniability for his client while making the shape of the demand perfectly clear. Taejun waited until the man finished. Then he said, Your client conducted a criminal surveillance operation on Korean soil. The evidence of that operation is documented and has been submitted to my legal counsel. The individual targeted was a Korean resident, a private citizen, who had no knowledge of the surveillance and has already provided a statement to that effect. This is not a negotiation about reputational damage. This is a notification that if your client does not confirm, in writing, within 18 hours, that all materials gathered through that operation are destroyed, the matter will be referred to the Financial Crimes Division and the National Police Agency. A pause on the line. My client would want me to convey, the partner said more carefully, that there are materials in their possession which could be uncomfortable for your principal if made public. My principal is aware of that possibility and has determined that the discomfort of public litigation is preferable to any accommodation with people who put a listening device in a private citizen's handbag. Taejun's voice was completely level. 18 hours. Confirm in writing or we file. There is no other conversation to have. He ended the call. The room was quiet for a moment. Seo exhaled through his nose. They'll take the deal. Maybe, Attorney Choi said. If their domestic exposure is what we think it is, the Korean surveillance charge is more dangerous to them than what they gathered is valuable. But if they think the materials are worth more than the risk, they're not, Taejun said. What they gathered is leverage for a negotiation I'm not going to have. Without the negotiation, it's just evidence of crimes they committed. He stood. The counterparty documentation for the 4 transactions. Where are we? 2 of the 4 are already located. The 3rd is coming from an archive in Singapore, should be here within 6 hours. The 4th, Choi hesitated. The 4th is the problem. Tell me. The counterparty for the last transaction, the entity that was dissolved. The principal documentation should have been held by the registered agent. The registered agent retired 14 months ago. His records were transferred to a successor firm, and somewhere in that transfer, she spread her hands. Some things were misfiled. We're looking. How serious is the 4th transaction without documentation? Serious. How serious? If the other 3 are clean and we can demonstrate the dissolution was procedurally sound, the 4th might be arguable. Maybe. But it's the weakest point and it's the one a prosecutor would go to first. She looked at him steadily. We need that document. Taejun turned to Seo. Every resource we have on finding it. Tonight. Seo was already on his phone. What? Imani had been in the secondary conference room for most of the morning. At some point, someone had brought sandwiches that sat mostly untouched. She'd been reading the documents. Seo had handed her a selective package, the parts that were relevant to her own situation. And she'd been doing what she always did with complex information, which was read it twice, build the structure of it in her head, and then sit quietly with the architecture until she knew where the weak points were. Taejun found her there at 2 in the afternoon. She was at the far end of the table, the documents organized in front of her in the way she organized everything. Not by document type, but by chronology. Each piece placed in the sequence of events it belonged to, the whole thing readable like a timeline if you walked the length of the table. He sat down. She looked at the timeline she'd built. The 4th transaction, she said. He looked at her. I know which one it is, she said. I processed the payment instructions for it. I remember it because the counterparty name was unusual. I had to verify the spelling twice with the Singapore office. She looked at him. I might know where the documentation is. He was very still. What do you mean? When the registered agent retired, I was the one who coordinated the handover with the successor firm. I do that for all the entity-level transitions. It goes through my desk because I track the registered agent relationships for all subsidiaries. She reached for her new bag, pulled out her tablet. I keep a shadow file. For every transition, I keep a scanned copy of the primary documentation before it moves, in case something gets lost in transit. She looked at him. In case something gets lost in transit. He stared at her. You have it, he said. If the scan is complete, yes. I'd have to check the archive. She was already pulling up a filing system on her tablet. It's in an encrypted personal drive I maintain separately from the company system. I started doing it 4 years ago after we lost 3 weeks of correspondence during a server migration. She looked up. You didn't know I did this? No. You didn't know because you never asked how I protected against document loss. You just expected things not to get lost. There was no anger in it, just a fact, stated plainly. Yes, he said. She looked back at the tablet. Her fingers moved through a file structure. Here. She turned the screen toward him. The document was there, scanned, time-stamped, complete. The primary agreement for the 4th transaction, with all counterparty information intact. He looked at it for a long moment, then he looked at her. 8 years, he said, and it came out differently than he intended. Not as a statement about time, but as something closer to the beginning of an understanding he was only now reaching the end of. 8 years, she said. She didn't look up from the screen. Let me send this to Attorney Choi. Well, the answer from the Korean legal firm came at 11:17 that night. Written confirmation. All gathered materials destroyed. Matter closed. No further contact. Taejun read the email twice. He was in his office. The building was mostly empty. Skeleton staff, the overnight security rotation, the particular quiet of a large building at night when the work of the day has settled into its systems and is resting. He called Seo. Seo picked it up on one ring. It's done, Taejun said. A pause. The documentation came through? Everything. The 4th transaction is covered. The communication from the intermediary is in writing. Choi has it. The 2 compliance employees. Handle the junior analyst in the morning. Standard process. Clean termination for cause. No public statement. He leaned back in his chair. The other one I'll speak to myself. There's still the question of the original Kwon conversation. His involvement, his sources. Kwon did what he came to do. I'm not interested in pulling that thread. Seo was quiet for a moment. That's generous. It's strategic. A pause. And maybe a little generous. Seo made a sound that was as close to a laugh as he ever got. Get some sleep. Taejun ended the call. He sat in the quiet. The city outside was doing its late-night business, reduced to its essentials at this hour, the lights fewer and steadier, the noise compressed to the lowest register. He looked at it for a long time. Then he got up and walked down the corridor. Her desk was empty. She'd left at 9, after Choi had confirmed the document was sufficient and the legal position had stabilized. She'd packed her things with the same quiet efficiency she did everything with. Organized, unhurried, not waiting for acknowledgement. And she'd said goodnight to the 2 people still in the conference room and walked to the elevator. She hadn't come to his office. He stood at her desk and looked at it. The surface was clear, everything filed, her monitor dark, the chair pushed in at the precise angle she always left it. Her desk plant, a small, stubborn succulent she'd had for as long as he could remember, that had survived 3 office moves and 1 very bad week when the building's climate control broke down, sat in its usual corner, slightly tilted toward the window. He had stood in this building for 15 years, and that succulent had been here for most of it, and he had never once registered it as something that mattered. It had simply existed at the edge of his attention the way she had. Present, functional, taken for granted, in the specific way that things are taken for granted when you've stopped seeing them. He pulled out his phone. He typed, "Are you home?" The response came after 3 minutes. "Yes. Is something wrong?" "No. Everything's resolved. I wanted you to know." A pause. "Thank you for telling me." He stood there in the corridor next to her empty desk, holding his phone, and he typed something and deleted it, and typed something else and deleted that too. And then he typed, "I want to take you somewhere tomorrow. Not work, just somewhere, if you're willing." The pause this time was longer. Long enough that he put the phone in his pocket and walked back toward his office. Because standing in a corridor at midnight waiting for a reply was, he didn't have a word for what it was. Undignified wasn't right. It wasn't dignity he was worried about. The phone buzzed. Where? He looked at the message. He thought about 8 years of small details. Things she'd mentioned in passing. Things he'd filed away in some part of his memory that apparently kept better records than he'd known. A salon she'd described once to a colleague on a call he'd half overheard. A dress in a shop window she'd mentioned, burgundy, that she'd passed 3 times without going in. A restaurant she'd said had the best jollof rice outside of Lagos, which she'd never had time to actually visit because she was always working through dinner when they were in that part of the city. He knew these things. He had always known them. He had just never known he was going to need to use them. "Somewhere you've been meaning to go," he typed. "I'll explain in the morning." Another pause. "Okay," she sent back. And then, after a second, "Good night, Taejun." He looked at those words on the screen. The way she said his name, even in text, without tone or inflection, had the same quality it always had. Not formal, not soft, just direct, like the word for the person she was talking to. "Good night," he sent back. He pocketed the phone and walked back to his office and stood at the window for a while, the city spread below him in all its nighttime indifference. And he thought about a woman who had spent 8 years building shadow files against the possibility of document loss, quietly protecting against failure modes he hadn't known to plan for, and how the one document that might have undone everything had been sitting in her personal encrypted archive for 14 months, because she anticipated problems that hadn't happened yet and prepared for them anyway. He thought about how much of his empire she had been holding up without anyone, including him, ever fully accounting for it. I thought about the fact that she had sat in that conference room and built his timeline out of his own documents more efficiently than anyone else on his team, while simultaneously managing the shock of learning that the last 14 months of her personal life had been engineered by people who saw her as a utility. She had not fallen apart. She had organized the table and found the missing document. And he had stood in front of her and known, not suspected, not considered, but known with the clarity of something that had been true for a long time and was only now getting to be said, that whatever he'd thought he was building toward in his life, whatever the empire and the reputation and the controlled architecture of it, had been in service of, none of it was the part he was going to need at the end. This was the part he was going to need. And he had one dinner to begin saying so, to a woman who had every rational reason in the world not to let him. He was not going to walk in with control this time. He was not going to manage the outcome or calculate the approach or build the conversation from a position of information advantage. He was going to walk in as exactly what he was, a man who had taken far too long and done considerable damage getting here, and he was going to tell her the truth and see what she did with it. It was the most dangerous thing he'd done in 15 years. It was also, for the first time in as long as he could remember, the only thing he actually wanted to do. He picked her up at 10, not with a driver. He came himself, which she registered the moment she stepped out of her building and found him on the pavement with his car at the curb and no one else in it. I was wearing a dark coat she hadn't seen before. Not the formal armor he wore to board meetings, something with slightly less structure, like he'd stood in front of his closet this morning and made a deliberate choice about who he was trying to be today rather than what he was trying to project. She was wearing her regular coat over a rust-colored blouse. She had spent approximately 40 minutes trying to decide what to wear and had eventually stopped trying and put on what felt like herself, which was, she thought, probably the right outcome. He looked at her when she came down the steps, not the way he looked at proposals or problems or anything that required evaluation. He just looked the way you look at something when looking is the whole point. "You didn't bring a driver," she said. "No." "Where are we going?" "First stop is Apgujeongro. I'll explain as we get there." She got in. He went around to the driver's side. The morning was cold and clear, the kind of Seoul autumn Saturday, where the light came in low and deliberate and made the ordinary city look like it had been considered. They drove for a few minutes without talking, and the silence had a quality she was still learning to read. Not the professional silence of the office, not the weighted silence of difficult conversations, but something newer and less defined, like a room that had just been opened after a long time closed and hadn't yet decided what it wanted to be. "How are you?" he said. He said it the way people say it when they actually mean it, which was different from the way it was usually said, and she noticed the difference immediately. She looked at the passing street. "I don't fully know yet. Ask me at the end of the day." "Fair enough." A block of quiet. "My mother called last night," she said. She'd heard from Tunde's family. Their version of events was creative. His jaw shifted, just slightly. "What kind of creative?" "The kind where I ended the engagement impulsively due to an unhealthy attachment to my employer." She said it without heat, the tone of someone who has already processed a thing enough to describe it without being inside it. She was not initially pleased. "I'm sorry." "Don't be." She also said that a man who sends his son across an ocean to use a woman as a tool is a man who raised something she didn't have a polite word for. A pause. "My mother is occasionally very efficient." I was quiet. The tightness in his jaw had eased. She glanced at him. "The operation. Fully contained?" "Yes, written confirmation filed with Choi yesterday evening. The Adebayo intermediary closed it." "The 2 employees?" "The junior analyst was terminated yesterday. Clean process. No public statement." He changed lanes. "I handled the other one personally. He's 26. He was in debt, and they found him when he was desperate." He kept his eyes forward. "I referred him to an outplacement service. The termination reason on file is performance-related." She looked at him. "You didn't expose him." "He wasn't the architect. He was a door they pushed open when it was unlocked." A pause that had weight in it. "I'm not interested in destroying a 26-year-old's future over something the Adebayo side engineered." She looked at him for a long moment. He didn't look back. I was watching the road with the particular focused stillness he carried into rooms where decisions were being made. Except this wasn't a room with decisions. This was just a car on a Saturday morning. "That's different," she said, "from how you would have handled it a year ago." "Yes." "What changed?" He didn't answer immediately. He pulled the car to a stop on Apgujeongro outside a building with a discreet sign and a window that showed very little of the interior, the kind of deliberate understatement that announces expense more effectively than any display could. He turned off the engine. "You mentioned it," he said, "about 2 years ago. You were on a call and you said you'd always wanted to go but never made the time. You said the name of it twice." He looked at her. I remembered. She looked at the salon, then back at him. "You remembered a salon I mentioned in passing 2 years ago." "I remember everything you say." He held her eyes. "I just never did anything with it. That was the failure, not the remembering." She looked at the window again, then at her hands. There was a specific quality to this moment. She could feel it, the way you feel a shift in air pressure before weather changes. Like something that had been held tightly for a very long time was being very carefully set down. "I'm not here to be bought," she said. Not harshly, just clearly. "I know that." "Then what is this?" "A morning that's about you," he said. "Not about the job. Not about what I need. Just—" He stopped. Restarted, more carefully. "You've spent 8 years making my life run. I want you to have a morning where someone does something because they know what you want. That's the whole thing." She looked at the salon door. She thought about 14 months of a man building his approach around knowing exactly what she wanted and using that knowledge to get inside a door she hadn't known she'd left open. She thought about the difference between someone learning what you want in order to take something from you and someone learning what you want in order to give something back. She opened the car door. 2 hours, she said, and then you tell me where we're eating. He waited in a coffee shop around the corner. He ordered 2 espressos and drank them both and did not look at his phone more than once. And even that once was to confirm with Attorney Choi that the written confirmation had been properly filed and archived, which Choi confirmed in 4 words: filed, archived, done, sleep. And then he put his phone face down on the table and looked at the street. He thought about his father. This was not something he did with any regularity. His father had been dead for 11 years, and before that had been, in all the ways that mattered, a closed subject, a man who expressed love through provision and presence, and not through words, who had built a household that ran with precision and warmth, and had somehow never said, to Taejun's memory, anything that could be described as an open statement of what his son meant to him. Taejun had understood this intellectually for a long time. He had not understood, until recently, that he had replicated it entirely, that he had taken the blueprint of a man who loved through structure rather than speech, and built a 43-floor version of it and installed himself at the top and called it success. He thought about a 15-year-old sleeping in an unheated building and deciding that the way to survive the cold was to stop being the kind of person who felt it. He thought about how long and how thoroughly he had committed to that project. He thought about a woman who had walked into his professional life and, without intending to, had been the one consistent presence that reminded him, not loudly, not philosophically, just by existing and being real in his vicinity, that there was a person inside the architecture. He had not let himself think about what that meant until she put 2 envelopes on his desk and turned around and walked out, and something in his chest had simply stopped working correctly. He looked at the coffee cup. 41 years old. An empire. And not one thing in his personal life he would call, without flinching, a real thing. That was the accounting. That was where he actually was. She appeared around the corner at 11:53. Her hair had been done, something that framed her face differently, softer, that was simply more her in a way he found he had words for even if they weren't technical words. She was walking with the slight self-conscious energy of someone who had done something for themselves and was still settling into it, the way a person moves after doing something they've been putting off for 2 years. She stopped in front of him on the pavement. "Well," she said. "It suits you," he said. She looked at him. Then she laughed, short and slightly embarrassed. "Don't say it like you're signing off on a quarterly result." "I don't know how else to say it yet." He held her eyes without deflection. "I'm working on that." She looked at him with the particular attention she brought to things she was trying to see accurately rather than conveniently. He had the sense of being read, not assessed for professional utility, but actually read, the way you read something when you want to understand it rather than use it. "Lunch," she said. "This way." The restaurant was a small Nigerian place in Mapogu, the one she'd mentioned in passing twice in the past year. Once to Ada on a phone call he'd half overheard. Once to a colleague during a conversation he hadn't been involved in but had been within earshot of, the way he was always within earshot of her without having acknowledged to himself why he positioned himself that way. When she realized where they were parking, she went still with her hand on the door. "You remembered that too," she said. "I told you." "You told me you remember everything." She looked at the restaurant front. "What I'm trying to work out is whether that's reassuring or whether it should worry me. I've been nothing but transparent with you for 3 weeks. You've been transparent. You haven't been simple." She got out. "There's a difference." He got out. They stood on the pavement outside the restaurant and she had an expression on her face he'd seen her wear when she was deciding how much to say, and had decided to say most of it. "I need to tell you something," she said, "before we go in. All right? I'm not here because I've arrived somewhere. I haven't resolved everything and decided it's fine and we're starting fresh." She looked at him directly. "I'm here because I choose to be here today, on this day, in this particular morning. That's the whole extent of what I'm offering right now." "I understand." "I don't think you do yet. Because you're a man who thinks in structures, and structures have projections, and I need you to not project." She held his eyes. "I need you to let today be today, and not a data point toward a conclusion." He looked at her for a moment. "That's not a thing I'm naturally good at." "I know. I've watched you for 8 years." She crossed her arms, not in defensiveness, more like she was holding herself steady. "But I need it anyway. Because the last man who paid close attention to me was running a strategy, and it's going to take me a while to fully trust that this isn't one. The words landed where they were meant to land. He took them in without repositioning them. It's not a strategy, he said, but I can't prove that in a conversation. The only proof I have is time, and time is exactly what you're telling me not to collapse into a projection. He paused. So I'll do what you're asking. Today is today. That's enough. She held his gaze for another moment. Okay, she said, and then, the jollof rice here supposedly takes 45 minutes. Then we'll wait. You don't wait for things. I'm learning. Something moved across her face. Not quite a smile, but the shape of where one might eventually be. She pulled the door open and went in, and he followed her into the warm noise of a small restaurant on a Saturday afternoon. They were there for 3 hours and 20 minutes. The jollof rice took 48 minutes and was, she told him, exactly right. The particular rightness of something you've been anticipating long enough that the real thing has to work hard to match the imagined version. And this one did. He ate without performing opinions, and when she asked whether it was good, he said yes in the plain way he said things when he meant them, without additional architecture around the word. She talked about Lagos, about the mango tree in her mother's yard that dropped fruit directly onto the path to the front gate, and her mother's absolute refusal to have it removed, on the grounds that a tree that had been there longer than she had earned its right to stay. About learning to navigate her mother's logic, which operated on its own internal consistency and was impervious to external argument. He listened, not performed listening. He didn't nod at regular intervals or summarize back what she'd said to prove he'd heard it. He just listened, with his hands around his water glass and his eyes on her, and occasionally asked something that told her he'd been following the specific thread rather than the general topic. He told her about the loading dock, about being 17 and cold in a way that settled into the bones and changed the way a person moved through rooms. The particular wariness of someone who had learned that warmth was not guaranteed and had decided to stop needing it as a preemptive measure. He said this looking at the table, his voice flat in the way voices go flat when they're covering something that still has some heat in it under the flatness. She didn't say anything for a moment after. She let it exist without wrapping it in something softer. Then she said, "You've been cold for about 25 years. He looked up. "I'm not saying it as a criticism," she said. "I'm saying it as an observation. 25 years is a long time to maintain any one position." She picked up her fork. "And I think some part of you knew it. I think some part of you has known for a long time that the architecture was the wrong solution to the problem. You just couldn't figure out how to dismantle it without everything coming down." He was quiet. "What changed?" she said again. Not aggressively, just returning to it, because it was the question under all the other questions. "You put 2 envelopes on my desk," he said, "and you turned around and walked out, and I sat there and I couldn't—" He stopped. "I've sat across from men in rooms where the outcome was my life or theirs, and I kept thinking, I kept functioning. You handed me a letter of resignation, and I stopped." He looked at her steadily. "I didn't understand what that meant for about 3 days. And then I understood, and it was like looking at a structure you've been inside your whole life and suddenly seeing the outside of it. You understand its shape for the first time because you're standing somewhere you've never stood before." She held his gaze. "And what did the outside of it look like? Like I'd built something that had no room in it for the person who made it worth building." He said it without flinching. "Like I'd been so focused on the construction that I never asked what it was for." The restaurant moved around them. Other tables, other conversations, a waiter who came and refilled their water and left without intruding. Outside, the afternoon had committed itself, the light flattening toward the middle of the day. "I need to tell you something too," she said. She set her fork down. "Something I've been carrying that I haven't said. Say it." "I stayed," she said. 8 years. And part of that was the job. It was a good job. And I was good at it, and that mattered. But not all of it." She looked at her hands on the table. "Part of it was that I was waiting for something to change, not expecting it, not planning for it, just leaving a door open in some part of myself that I didn't examine too closely." She looked up. "Which means some of those 8 years, I was making a choice I hadn't admitted I was making, and that's on me, not on you. That's on you. That's mine." "You were 29 when you started," he said. "I know how old I was. You deserve to be told at 29 or 30 or 34 that you were seen. You deserved not to have to wait. His voice was level, but something in it had weight. That's not a thing you take responsibility for. That's what I didn't do. She looked at him for a moment. We've both made a mess of this, she said. Yes. All right. She picked up her fork again. Then that's the foundation we're working from. The actual one, not a clean one. She ate a bite of rice. I can work with actual. He looked at her. Something in him, some mechanism that had been running at high tension for weeks, maybe months, maybe much longer than that, released a small amount of pressure. Not everything, just enough to breathe differently. So can I, he said. There was one more stop. He hadn't planned it. It happened because they walked back toward the car after lunch at the slow pace of two people who had been sitting for a long time and had no urgency about stopping the afternoon, and they passed a shop window, and she slowed. He slowed with her. In the window was a dress, burgundy, floor-length, structured at the shoulder, in a way that was formal without being stiff, the kind of dress that required occasion and invented the occasion by existing. She was looking at it with the expression he had seen twice in 8 years. The one where she wanted something and was assembling the reasons not to want it, the reasons arriving in their usual order, well-practiced, completely convincing to anyone who didn't know what to look for. You mentioned it, he said. A year ago, you passed it 3 times. She turned to look at him. How do you know I passed it 3 times? You mentioned it 3 times. Once to a colleague, once to your cousin on the phone, once... He stopped. You said you kept passing it on the way to the Mapo office, and it made no practical sense. She stared at him. You were never eavesdropping, she said slowly. Were you? You just noticed. I always noticed, he said. I just didn't know what to do with it. She looked back at the dress. The silence between them had a specific quality. Not uncomfortable, not loaded, just full. The kind of silence that exists when something true has just been said plainly and is settling into the air. It's impractical, she said. Most things that matter are. I don't have anywhere to wear it. You will. He said it without performance, just the quiet certainty of a man who had decided to mean what he said. You'll have somewhere. That's not a promise about anything specific. It's just a fact about who you are and how your life is going to go. He paused. If you want it, get it. Not because I remembered it, because you've been passing it for a year. She stood at the window for another moment. She was doing the thing she did when she was fighting the part of herself that had been trained over years of being practical and responsible and the person who held things together, to defer what she wanted to what was sensible. Then she pushed the door open. He stood on the pavement while she was inside. 12 minutes. He counted without intending to count, looking at the street, at the other people moving through there Saturday with the ordinary purposefulness of people who have somewhere to be. He thought about nothing complex. He breathed the cold air and felt his hands in his coat pockets, and thought about how different this felt from the boardrooms and the operational planning and the 15 years of controlled outcomes. The standing on a pavement not knowing what was happening on the other side of a shop door. He did not attempt to control it. She came out with a white bag. She didn't hold it up or make anything of it. She simply fell back into step beside him, the bag in one hand, her face doing the thing where she was trying to look like she wasn't pleased with herself. Don't, she said. I'm not doing anything. You have a face. I don't have faces. I'm famously without facial expression. You have exactly one face, she said, that you make when something went the way you wanted it to. It's very subtle and completely obvious once you know what you're looking for. She looked at him. 8 years. Fair, he said. They walked back to the car. She put the bag on the back seat. He started the engine. The afternoon was tilting toward evening, the light changing quality, the city settling into its later-in-the-day register. I want to ask you something, she said. Ask. The night at the restaurant, Seren. She looked at the window as he pulled into traffic. You said you couldn't watch him touch you, but I've been thinking about that, and I want to know. When did you know? Not that night. When did you actually first know? He drove for half a block without answering. Not avoiding. She could tell the difference by now between avoidance and the particular stillness of a man taking a question seriously. 4 years ago, he said. Maybe 4.5. He kept his eyes on the road. You were sick. Do you remember? You had that respiratory thing that lasted 2 weeks, and you came in anyway for the first week because there was the Dajan acquisition happening, and you didn't trust the handover timing. I remember. You fell asleep at your desk on the Thursday. I walked past and you'd just gone under mid-sentence on a document. Your head was on your arms. He was quiet for a moment. I stood in the doorway for probably 2 minutes, and I thought about going in and telling you to go home, and I didn't because he stopped. Because the reason I didn't want to wake you up wasn't professional. It was because you looked, he chose the word carefully, peaceful. And I didn't want to take that from you. And then I thought about why I didn't want to take it from you, and I put it away. Because I didn't have anything to do with it that was acceptable, given where we were. She was quiet. And I kept putting it away, he said, for 4 years, until you put 2 envelopes on my desk and there was nowhere left to put it. The car moved through traffic. Outside, Seoul did what Seoul does. Enormous and indifferent and lit with the early evening energy of a city that doesn't slow down much. She said finally, You should have woken me up. He looked at her briefly. You should have woken me up and told me to go home, she said. Even if you couldn't say the rest of it. Even if you weren't ready for the rest of it. I was sick and working myself to the ground, and you stood in the doorway for 2 minutes and then walked away. She looked at him. That's the thing that cost both of us. Not the not knowing, the knowing and doing nothing. Yes, he said. I know. I need you to really know that, not as an apology, as something you understand going forward. She turned in the seat slightly to face him more directly. Because I cannot do another 8 years of someone who knows what I need and says nothing. You won't, he said. I need more than a statement. I know. He pulled the car to a stop at a red light. He turned and looked at her fully, which he didn't do when he was driving, which meant he was willing to hold the car stopped longer than the light required if that was what this needed. I woke you up at 4 in the morning last Tuesday when the Choi legal confirmation came through because I knew you'd been carrying the uncertainty and I knew you couldn't fully rest while it was open. He held her eyes. I didn't send an email. I called. Because I knew the difference between the two, and I chose the one that cost me more. She thought about that call. Her phone at 4 in the morning, his voice on the other end, 5 words. It's done. Everything is clear. And how she had lain there afterward with her hand over her chest, feeling something release that she hadn't fully known she was holding. She had not told him what that call meant. Okay, she said. The light changed. He looked back at the road. Okay, she said again, more quietly, to herself as much as to him. She called her mother that evening from her apartment, sitting on the sofa with the white bag on the chair across from her and the early night pressing against the windows. Her mother answered on the second ring and launched immediately into the prepared version of the conversation she'd been composing since the Adebayo family had provided their account of events. Imani let her go for approximately 45 seconds and then said, Mama, I know. Let me go first. Her mother stopped. Imani talked for almost an hour. She told her mother all of it, the device, the 14 months, the way Tunde had been built into her life like a key cut for a specific lock. She told her about sitting in a conference room at 2 in the morning, building a timeline out of someone else's documents, while everything she'd thought she knew about the past year reorganized itself around a different center of gravity. She told her about the encrypted archive, and about the 4th transaction document, and about how the thing that might have undone everything had been sitting in her personal files for 14 months, because she anticipated document loss and prepared for it without being asked. Her mother listened to all of this with the particular quality of attention that is itself a form of love. The kind that doesn't interrupt, doesn't redirect, doesn't try to fix the thing while it's still being said. When Imani finished, her mother was quiet for a moment. Then, this employer, Kong. Yes. Tell me about him. Imani looked at the white bag on the chair. He's not simple. He's built very high walls and he's lived inside them for a long time, and he's only recently started to understand what that cost him. She paused. He remembered a salon I mentioned twice, 2 years ago. He remembered a dress I'd passed 3 times without buying. He drove me himself this morning, no driver. She paused. He told me he'd known something for 4 years and spent 4 years not acting on it because he didn't know how to be someone who acted on it. Her mother was quiet. What do you think of him? Imani said. I think that's the wrong question. Her mother's voice was dry and specific, the voice of a woman who had raised a daughter alone and had opinions forged in the actual work of surviving hard things. I don't know this man. I know what you've told me about 8 years of him treating you like a function and not a person. A pause. I also know that a man who drives himself to pick you up on a Saturday is a man who decided you were worth inconveniencing himself for. Those are both true. Yes. The question is not what I think. The question is what your eyes tell you when you look at what his hands actually do. Her mother had said this to her 3 times in her life, at 3 different junctures, and each time it had been the useful thing. Not what he says, not what he intends, what he does. That's the accounting. His hands, Imani said, are doing things I didn't expect them to do. She looked at the window. He called me at 4 in the morning when the legal matter resolved. He didn't send a message. He called. Her mother made a sound that was not quite a word. He said, Imani stopped. He said the reason he didn't wake me up 4 years ago when I fell asleep at my desk was because I looked peaceful, and he didn't want to take that from me. And he knew, even then, that the reason was not professional, and he walked away. A long silence. Well, her mother said, I know. That's a man who knew something and spent 4 years not knowing what to do with it. Yes. And now he's learning what to do with it. He's trying. Imani shifted on the sofa, very slowly, with visible effort. He still sometimes gets the face where you can tell he's stopping himself from trying to manage the outcome of something that doesn't need to be managed. She paused. But he stops. He catches it, and he stops. Her mother was quiet for another moment. Call me Sunday, she said, and eat something that is not biscuits. I eat real food. You eat biscuits and convince yourself it was a meal. I know how you function under stress. Her mother's voice softened into something that didn't require a word for it. You're all right, Imani. You always come out all right. It's not luck. It's something in you. The call ended. Imani sat in the quiet of her apartment and felt the particular stillness of someone who has been through a significant amount of weather and has come out the other side still themselves, changed in ways that would keep revealing themselves, but intact in the core, in the part that counted. She got up. She went to the kitchen and made actual dinner, rice and the leftover stew she'd made earlier in the week, and she ate at her table by the window and watched the street below and thought about nothing very organized. On the windowsill was a small succulent, a cutting she'd taken from the one on her desk at the office 2 years ago, rooted in a glass and potted when it held. She'd never mentioned it to anyone. It was a small thing, the kind of small thing that doesn't require an audience. She looked at it for a moment. Then she finished her dinner and washed the bowl and went to bed, and she slept without difficulty for the first time in several weeks. The weeks that followed moved differently, not dramatically, not in the way of stories where transformation announces itself, more like the way light changes across a room through an afternoon, so gradually that you don't mark the individual moments, only notice at some point that the quality of everything is different from what it was. She came back to work. This was not announced as a formal decision. It simply happened. The resigned pending status in the administrative system quietly closed. The transition documents Imani had prepared for her own replacement filed away and not referenced again. She was at her desk on Monday morning with her coffee and her tablet and the day's schedule pulled up, and the floor sounded like itself again. The work was unchanged. This was the first thing she noticed, and it steadied her. The particular anchor of a thing that is simply what it is regardless of what else is shifting. She was still organizing his empire. She still occasionally dropped things. She still apologized with the reflexive speed of someone who had been apologizing for minor clumsiness her entire life. And Taejun still watched her with the expressionless expression that she now knew was not expressionless. What changed was the texture. He brought her coffee sometimes. Not every day. She would have been suspicious of every day, too deliberate, too managed. But occasionally, without announcement or expectation, a cup appeared at the corner of her desk when she was deep in something. She drank it without comment. He didn't require comment. He knocked before entering her workspace now. Not always. There were still moments of old habit where he appeared in a doorway without preamble, but often enough that she noticed the difference and what it cost a man for whom ownership of his own space was deeply ingrained. When she worked late, he worked late. This was not new in its fact, but new in its quality. A conscious awareness between them, an acknowledgement without words that the presence mattered. They had dinner 3 times in the first month. Quiet places, booths with depth to them. Restaurants where the lighting suggested conversation rather than performance. They argued at the second dinner about a management decision she thought was short-sighted and he thought was acceptable. And she presented her case with the directness of someone who had stopped modulating herself for his comfort, and he listened without deflecting and said, eventually, that she was right, which he said in the particular way of a man who is still learning that being wrong in someone's company doesn't diminish him. She noticed the learning. She didn't say she noticed, because not every observation needed to be spoken, which was itself something she was learning. The difference between the transparency she needed from him and the transparency she owed him in return, Sab. In the 4th week, he asked her properly. He came to her desk on a Thursday at the end of the day when the floor had mostly emptied. She was shutting down her systems, everything filed, the particular thoroughness of someone who doesn't like to leave loose ends for the morning to inherit. He stopped at the edge of her desk and waited until she looked up. I want to apologize, he said. Not for the restaurant. I've apologized for that. I mean for the 8 years. He stood with his hands at his sides, not in his pockets, not on the desk. Just there, which she recognized as the posture of someone who has decided not to give themselves anything to hold on to. I used what you gave without accounting for what it cost. I put you in rooms and relied on your judgment and your discretion and your extraordinary competence, and I gave you nothing back. Not acknowledgement, not consideration, not even the basic recognition that what you were doing was remarkable and that you were remarkable for doing it. He held her eyes. I don't say this as a prelude to anything. I say it because it needed to be said in its own sentence, without asking for anything in return. She looked at him for a long moment. I received that, she said. He nodded. I also want to say something back, she said. And I need you to let me say it without trying to qualify it or absorb the blame for my choices. Say it. I stayed for reasons that weren't entirely about the job. I told you some of this before, but I'm saying the whole of it now. She folded her hands on the desk. I was hoping. I don't know exactly what I was hoping for. Something like this, maybe. Something like being seen. And I kept that hope in a closed room inside myself for years because it seemed like the only reasonable thing to do with it. And that's mine. That's not yours to take on. She looked at him steadily. We were both doing something we couldn't talk about, and we've both paid for it. And that's the actual thing we're starting from. Not clean, he said. Not clean. Real. She uncrossed her hands. I can work with real. So can I, he said. It's actually the only thing I've ever been able to work with. She looked at him for another moment. Then she said, There's a restaurant in Hanamdong I mentioned once, about 3 months ago. Good lamb stew. I know the one? Of course you do. Something moved across her face that was fully a smile now. Not the shape of one, but the real thing, warm and slightly exasperated in the way that warmth and exasperation coexist when you know someone well enough to be amused by them. Tomorrow, 7 o'clock. 7 o'clock, he said. You're paying, obviously. And you don't optimize the table. He paused. The pause was one beat too long. Last time, she said, you requested the corner table because it had better sight lines to the entrance. It did have better sight lines. We are going to a restaurant for dinner, not a security assessment. She looked at him. We sit wherever they put us. He had the expression of a man accepting a reasonable condition he doesn't entirely agree with. Fine. Thank you. She picked up her bag, stood. Good night, Taejun. Good night, he said. She moved toward the elevator. He stood at her desk for a moment after she'd gone, in the empty office with its dimmed lights and the city visible through the windows in its early evening configuration, and he looked at the small succulent on the corner of her desk, the one that had been there for as long as he could remember, that had survived 3 office moves and various maintenance failures. And he looked at it with the attention of a man who has decided to stop letting things exist at the edge of his vision. He had never thought to ask about that plant. He had never thought to ask about any of it, where she went after work, what her apartment looked like, whether her mother was well, what she did on weekends, who she was when she wasn't in his building holding his empire together. He was thinking about it now. He was going to keep thinking about it. I was going to ask the questions he hadn't asked for 8 years, and listen to the answers with the full attention he'd spent 15 years training on problems that mattered less. And he was going to do it without a strategy and without projecting the outcome and without trying to manage what he felt about what he heard. He was, in other words, going to try to be a person with another person, without the walls, without the architecture, just present, just there. It was the hardest thing he had undertaken in 41 years. And he was going to do it badly sometimes, and she was going to notice and say so, and he was going to listen rather than defend, and that was going to be the whole project for as long as it took. He turned off the light over her desk. I went back to his office and collected his coat and his keys, and he took the elevator down alone, and he walked out into the cool evening air of a city that was doing its ordinary business all around him, enormous and indifferent to the small, private, enormous event of a man deciding, not dramatically, not with ceremony, just in the plain way that real decisions actually get made, to stop being afraid of the one thing that had ever made him feel it. 3 months later, standing outside a restaurant in Hanam-dong on a Thursday evening with the city going dark around them, he held the door open and she walked through it, and the room was warm and loud and smelled of good food, and the host led them to a table that was not in the corner, not near the exit, not positioned for any tactical advantage. He sat down across from her. She picked up the menu. You're not looking at the door, she said, without looking up from the menu. I'm aware. How does that feel? He thought about it honestly. Strange, but manageable. She looked, the smile again, the real one. The one he'd watched through a restaurant window 8 weeks before her resignation and had not understood what he was seeing until it was almost too late. That's progress. I know. The waiter came. They ordered. The evening settled around them, unhurried, with the particular quality of time that belongs to 2 people who have stopped trying to get somewhere and have decided to simply be where they are. She told him something about her week, a small thing, domestic, her neighbor's cat that had taken to sitting outside her door and staring at it with the specific intensity of an animal that has decided a door is its enemy. He laughed, not the controlled acknowledgement that sometimes passed for laughter in professional settings, but a real laugh, short and unguarded, and she watched it happen with the expression of someone witnessing something that surprised them pleasantly. You laugh, she said, on occasion. I've worked with you for 8 years. I know. I've seen you laugh approximately 4 times. 5 if you count the time in the Singapore meeting when Director Huang's translator made that error about the, I wasn't in that meeting. No. He picked up his water glass. I'll have to tell you about it. She looked at him across the table in a restaurant on an ordinary Thursday evening in a city that held both of them without requiring anything of them in this moment. And she thought about all the Thursday evenings of the past 8 years. The ones she'd spent at her desk or in transit or in her apartment, managing the particular loneliness of a life organized almost entirely around someone else's requirements. She thought about this dress in her closet and the salon that had been worth the wait, and a phone call at 4 in the morning that had done more than a month of careful words. She thought about what her mother had said, what his hands actually do. "Tell me," she said. He told her. And the evening went on, and the food was good, and the city did what cities do, turned slowly through its hours, indifferent to everything below it except by accident. And two people sat at a table that was not in the corner and talked the way people talk when they have stopped managing the conversation and started simply having it. And that was the whole thing. That was, in the end,